the whole example about the general purpose AI, with the legal text that's so uncertain, it's not that the implementation will actually give the certainty.
Do you think this law's current implementation is in line with your expectations?
Well, that's a big question, because the law itself is not in line with my expectations. So implementation can only go the direction of the law. They see that the law has a lot of high sanctions, high fines, and they are afraid to therefore invest in AI and in developing AI. So in this uncertainty, I would have said better no law.
Mr. Mazzini, thanks for joining us today. You just wrapped up your trip to WAIC here. So how was it?
I was this third time in Shanghai.
Third time?
Yes.
Okay.
Although I haven't seen much of the city because I was busy with meetings and stuff. But I think this time it was different because this event, I think, has this feature of putting together, industry leaders, government leaders, and also policymakers and academics. And I think this is an interesting combination. I mean, when you think, my field is AI governance, as you know, and it's really important to bring together different perspectives, including academia. I think it's very important to bring academia. So I found this quite interesting that you have this big event, but diverse perspectives altogether. I've been to many events, industry, like big events like this, but you don't always find this combination between, like in my forums, there was academia, government, and industry.
Yesterday, I noticed that you taking quite a lot of notes on the forum. So would you mind sharing a little bit what you were writing down?
I have a horrible memory, so that's why I take a lot of notes. I can't say, I think I took notes of the presentations where, usually I'm interested in more some of the technical sides. Generally, the governance is something I rent myself easily, although you always have new things to learn, of course, especially in different jurisdictions. But when it comes to actual either technical components or applications, that's when I usually get interested, because a lot of the governance work that is often done is done a bit from top down. So very high level, without actually really understanding what actually the AI does in this use case, or sometimes thinking about speculative risks. So I like really to get to the basics, to the nitty gritty, to the details. And so when I find speakers that have the ability to really communicate concretely around, with examples, that's what I usually take notes about and find interesting.
I listened to your speech on the forum. You talk about the challenge of AI Act is facing.
Yes.
So as the world's first law on artificial intelligence, this law's current implementation is in line with your expectations?
Well, that's a big question because the law itself is not in line with my expectations. So implementation can only go the direction of the law, right? So when you build a law, you build the foundation of something. And implementation is kind of building then so you really build the house, the architecture, the structure, so you don't change that any longer. Yeah, and the foundations. And then you kind of start a bit, changing a little bit the furniture and I don't know, the colors and stuff like that. You can't really change the direction. And so implementation also, by definition, cannot do the job of legislation because it's just limited, because it's in some cases not binding, like for instance, guidelines are not binding, standards are not binding. So that's why, for me, discussing implementation is a bit an unfortunate question. That somehow there is the assumption in the EU that with implementation you can fix the regulation, but in reality you cannot. And maybe yes, some things you can a bit change course,
but it's not easy.
But it's not easy, and it doesn't give the legal certainty. So the whole example about the general purpose AI, with the legal text that's so uncertain, it's not that the implementation will actually give the certainty. So So yeah, the timing is certain. The Commission is investing a lot of resources in doing that, as you probably know. You follow that. So issuing guidelines one after the other and code of practice. But I wonder, how companies react to that.
Well, Mr. Mazzini, can I just ask a quick question, to clarify how the EU's legal system works? You've talked about the EU legislative process before, right? In your, the public speeches, well, from Parliament to Commission to Council. But in fact, there are some new organizations now, like AI Office and AI Board. Can you introduce them to us?
These are, I wouldn't say organizations. These are structures, so bodies. They are not independent from, they're not like any different institution. Like in the EU, you have Commission, Parliament, and Council. These are separate institutions with their own powers attributed to them by the treaty. The AI Office, the AI Board is a sort of a body or sub-entity that has been created by the AI Act.
Okay.
And the AI Office is actually the European Commission. So this is, personally, I think, one mistake done in the law to basically attribute certain function to what is actually a department of the Commission. You never do that. If you take, for instance, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, these are the places where the European Commission has enforcement powers. Because normally in EU law, member states have the enforcement powers because it's kind of a decentralized system. You rarely have the Commission have direct enforcement powers, except exceptionally. So in antitrust, trade law, this has always been the case. But in digital regulation or in product legislation or fundamental rights legislation, this has never been the case. So the Digital Services Act, the Digital Market Act, and now the AI Act have given these powers to the European Commission. But it's the European Commission that has legal personality. It's not the AI Office. The AI Office is one directorate of one Director General in the Commission. So it's been a cosmetic exercise because the Parliament had put in their opinion that they wanted to have an AI agency. But the concept of which they call the AI Office, but an AI agency requires a setup with a legal personality, which is not the type of enforcement that we have in the AI Act. So I think this has created, in my view, confusion. Because you have in the AI Act, sometimes it's the Commission has certain powers, sometimes it's the AI Office, but these are the same people. The board, that was actually part of our proposal, and the board was nothing else than a group, essentially, with no legal personality that was supposed to advise the Commission, made of representatives from the member states. This happens quite often, that in the implementation of the legislation, you have the member states sending representatives to Brussels to advise on their enforcement practices. So this is quite common. It was called AI Board, but in other legislation, you have these groups. For instance, for the medical device, it's called Medical Device Group.
Could you tell us in general terms, how does those legislation usually be drafted? Like how many people usually get involved in, or do experts seriously disagree or argue in many, discussions?
I think it depends a lot on the situations. Generally, the process is quite long, right? When it comes to the Commission is the initiator of the laws. So people like me just are tasked to, okay, you are responsible for this law, you draft it. And usually there are not a lot of people on the side of the Commission that actually take the pen. Normally it could be one or two people.
Okay. It depends.
It depends actually, but typically, one legislation is given to one or two people, right?
Okay.
With the AI Act, it was the same. Basically, I was the lead drafter, then there were two other colleagues. But this was also, from my point of view, a bit of an how do you call it? under evaluation or under I don't know how to say that. I don't find the right word. But essentially, something like the AI Act is not a simple piece of legislation, especially because it's horizontal. So it touches very different areas. So thinking that, I think we did miracles, my colleagues and I think, to put together the AI Act in such a short time frame and just with the limited resources. But then afterwards, once the proposal is out, it is debated in the council where each member state has a representative in the council formation. That representative looks at not only one specific law, but all the laws in a certain sector, like in this case is the telecom area. But then that person will send every draft back to their capital. Say the Italian representative send it to Rome, the German representative to Berlin. So there is this constant back and forth between Brussels and the capitals for their input. And then that input is debated within the council. And the council then comes to a final position. In the parliament, it's a bit of it's a different structure because the parliament assigns each file to a committee, to a parliamentary committee. The parliamentary committees represent basically the formation of the parliament. So there are several political groups, and the political groups assign the files depending on their weights, their votes. And so the AI Act was assigned to two committees, actually. The Civil Liberties Committees and the Internal Market Committee. And each committee assigned one rapporteur. And then the parliament also had so-called shadow rapporteurs, meaning people that kind of from a different party, but look at the file and also give opinions. So in the parliament, it's quite normal. This is the way of working. What is not normal that you get two committees and two rapporteurs. Normally you get one only. But this created also quite a lot of confusion. So many people involved.
Yeah.
And for me, that doesn't help. So if you take the position of the parliament, sometimes it's really difficult to understand because there were a lot of tensions between the different political groups. So sometimes they say one thing here and then the opposite here. And the quality of the draft of the parliament position, for me, was not very good. But then it comes to the point, and I finish, where you have a basically commission proposal, then you have the council position, the parliament position. These are final positions. And that's a moment when they have to agree on the law on the basis of these two texts, because the commission is not decision maker. The commission makes the proposal. But these other two are decision makers. So then they will start negotiating. Okay, I have this in Article 1, you have that in Article 1. So you give me this in Article 1, I give this in Article 2. I mean, it's a little bit more elaborate than that, but this is how the negotiations happens. But if you have two texts that are very different from each other, then it gets complicated. And if you want to close the negotiations very quickly, it's even more complicated.
Okay.
That's so complicated.
It's so complicated.
So that's why the AI office is not ready now, because a lot of people think that it's not easy to find the right person, like the AI scientist in Europe.
Yeah.
So what's the true reason for this?
I don't know why. It's always a bit sensitive to speak about your former colleagues, because if I had remained in the commission, I would be part of the AI office. So I think if the law is really so complex, of course, and you have not necessarily anticipated that complexity, this is what happens, that you kind of try to quickly find a solution between these two positions from parliament and council. There was a lot of political pressure because the mandate of the EU legislator was ending, and therefore people wanted to absolutely bring home this file. Also because, the EU should be the first to legislate AI. It is true that we were the most advanced jurisdiction, but to my mind, there was no need to rush, because if you cannot find a common sense agreement in the time frame that you think you should, then you can still wait for the next year, because there will be a new parliament, a new commission. This happened, for instance, in GDPR. So GDPR was negotiated over 2 legislatures and over 4 years. 4 years. The AI Act was 3 years. And for a legislation that is so new, like the AI Act, to me it's kind of shocking to see that it was negotiated even in a shorter period of time, with ChatGPT coming in the mix, with a law that has never been thought before, with the technology changing so fast.
Yeah.
And GDPR was based on a previous privacy legislation called the Data Protection Directive. So already we had a certain understanding of privacy concepts. There were already institutions. So the GDPR is an upgrade. And it took them 4 years. So that's why, the AI Act, in my view, was too rushed. And this explains why then today there is a challenge, because you have to think about the consequences of rushing legislation later. Because if you rush it, that means you don't think too much about what you're actually writing. And in fact, if you take, for instance, the definition of foundation model, is legally almost nonsense. So basically means nothing. Very difficult to apply. Or the definition of a foundation model with systemic risk, very difficult. So the only thing that the commission can do now is to correct the flops. But we know that the flops after DeepSeek is a flawed measurement. So, but there is nothing else. So this gives the sense how, if you force yourself to legislate on something where there is not a maturity to legislate, then you're facing similar challenges in implementation. And the commission, I think, maybe, in good faith, I don't want to say this, but they are trying to show as much as possible they are delivering. But if you read the guidelines, they don't give the clarity that one should have.
When you started to drafting the AI Act, there was no template, nothing to copy. So at that situation, where do you even start?
So the way I started was to think about how is AI already regulated today. That's what I said, I think, I think I said it yesterday. I don't remember, because I had also other meetings. But essentially, the first question is, okay, we have AI. This is kind of new phenomenon, new technology. But we have already laws in the EU. And we have a lot of technology-neutral law, like GDPR. GDPR regulates processing of personal data. It doesn't matter whether it's done by an AI, by software, by a person. So the law has principles and rules that apply regardless of the technology. So when I started thinking about AI legislation, then I started thinking, okay, what are the laws in the EU that potentially or directly or indirectly apply to AI? And there are quite a number of them, including, for instance, when it comes to products. For instance, we have medical device legislation, which regulates software as a medical device, like a diagnostic system. It doesn't mention AI, medical device regulation, but it regulates software. And of course, AI is software. So that legislation applies to AI, no doubt. So this was the point of departure. There are certain laws that already apply to AI. So if we need a new legislation on AI, because this was a political mandate that we had to honor, so then what are the areas where we may add some rules that are maybe considered needed because of specific characteristics of AI, like the black box issue or the complexity, the lack of transparency, but may not necessarily be included in existing legislation. So this gave me the inspirations, if you want, to then think about an ex ante control. okay, we have legislation like, for instance, all this product legislation like medical device, machinery, toys, where AI can be integrated. And then we can use the same regulatory approach, basically require not only for AI that is a component of those products, but also for self-sending AI, like a recommender system, that certain checks are done beforehand, before the system is placed on the market. And so that's what led me to come up with this idea of the new legislative framework. That's a technical concept. Also because this type of legislation can be coupled with other similar legislation. So it's a category of legislation that we have for all products, including software products like medical device. And so the AI Act, in fact, should be seen as a complementary layer to them. But I confess that the fact that it was horizontal made super complicated the interaction with legislation like, for instance, financial services or labor law or law enforcement law, because we had to choose one model. And if you take, for instance, financial services, it's a type of law that is nothing to do with product legislation. So we really had to think to be as least disruptive as possible.
When the AI Act took shape in 2021, nobody was thinking about ChatGPT. But when the ChatGPT burst onto the market in the end of 2022, right?
Yeah.
So what was your first reaction? Did these things make you rethink or revise any parts of the AI Act?
So to be honest, so we thought about generative AI in the proposal as well. Not to the extent of ChatGPT, because I think we were thinking mostly about image models. But we knew about GPT-2. And that's the reason why, if you take the proposal, the commission, the definition of AI, which is largely inspired by the OECD definition of AI, we changed the OECD definition to add content. And what we meant, so as an output of an AI, OECD mentioned only recommendations, decisions, and predictions, the OECD 2019. And we added in the AI Act definition content, and we meant exactly generative AI. So text, images, videos, audios, and so on.
Deepfake.
And in fact, there is an article on deepfake in the commission proposal. It was Article 52, where there is a labeling obligation for deepfakes. It's true, we didn't anticipate as much LLMs, or the fact that, and that was to me what struck me most, the fact that we didn't anticipate that actually you can ask a general purpose or an LLM, a chatbot, to even do high-risk applications. So I could ask ChatGPT, send, let's say, 10 resumes. Okay, please select me the resume that best fits this vacancy notice. This is technically potential selection of staff or personnel, and that's high risk. So for me, this was the most difficult issue to solve, which is not being solved by the AI Act, by the way, because you cannot apply the requirements of high risk to GPT. It just doesn't work. So this was at the time for me one of the questions I had, and still remains for me one of the questions around reconciling the risk-based framework and high-risk classification with systems that generate just text or have chatbots.
We just talked about the ChatGPT. So we all know the AI Act took a long way to get here, from early drafts to finally passed. But I still want to know, from your perspective, if something like ChatGPT had already existed before the drafts even began, do you think the AI Act would still have gone ahead? Well, what I mean is, if people had already seeing how quickly these large language models were developing, do you think that the EU would still go ahead with this kind of regulation?
Difficult to, of course, say, ex post, but I think I would say probably yes, because
Probably yes.
if you think that the advent of ChatGPT in some form accelerated the AI Act, almost because it became urgent. It became much more urgent to regulate AI after ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And so, because I think it was perceived by certain circles, including policymakers and politicians, as, now every single citizen now knows what is AI. And so we have a legislation. We need, of course, to include that to make sure that we can tell the citizens, we are protecting you, you're fine, we are taking care of you. So I feel ChatGPT really generated this interest on AI governance, AI regulation, that, let's say, if we had to think about the AI Act afterwards, I think it would have been included probably since the beginning. I would have hoped that if that was the case, we had more information. Because the problem is that when you regulate something that is so new, first of all, you have to make a bit of a choice. Okay, how much I'm willing to take a risk? To kind of let this technology a bit develop, unfold, let the market find its own way, including, of course, considering who are the companies that are. This is inevitable for a regulator to think about. Even in a product legislation, which normally you should not, it's not a regulation of the market, right? It's not you're regulating companies for the market share, who should be the winners or the losers. But of course, it's inevitable to think about the impact that such regulation has on your companies. I hope that should that situation materialize, we would have had more information about what to do with it. The fact that, for instance, the Commission didn't do any impact assessment, of course. Normally, the Commission always does an impact assessment on the impact of a regulation, right? But of course, generative AI foundation model was not part of the impact assessment. And so, nevertheless, rules were adopted without an impact assessment. And that's also a major deviation, I would say, because normally the difference between the Commission proposal and the final legislation is not that big. There are some changes, but the fundamental impacts remain similar. And in this case, instead, you have a whole new chapter added, which per se is a regulation in the regulation. If you think not only the articles on the AI Act, on general purpose AI, but indeed consider the guidelines, consider the code of practice, you're easily going to 200 pages. So it's a regulation in the regulation.
Because I think setting the technical standards is very hard, because the technology evolves so rapidly. But I really like your statement that you say that the AI Act is not regulating the technology itself, but the use of technology.
I think so.
Yes. So let's get into the heart of AI Act, the risk-based classification. A lot of people pay attention to the acceptable risks, like the emotion recognition or social scoring. So what's the difference between the acceptable risks and high risks AI systems?
The initial focus for me was high risk. The AI Act reflects this approach of product legislation, which means that essentially you create a system of ex-ante check of a product. So the product is not illegal. The product just requires some certification before being used. So that's the logic of product legislation. So when I thought about the AI Act, I thought the main goal of the Act, the main purpose should be exactly to do that. And for that, we created, essentially, that's the category of high risk. But at some moment, I don't recall all the details now, but this idea of the risk-based approach was inspired by a report of a German committee or commission, which was appointed in 2017, called the German Data Ethics Commission by the Merkel government. And in this report, it was just a report. They had identified, well, they came up first with this idea of, well, there may be some uses that are really unacceptable, some uses that create certain risk, some uses that are low risk. So of these risk layers. And so then we thought as well that that was a good way to show modularity in regulating AI. So for me, as I said, the main goal was just high risk. And the rest for me was nothing. So we don't need to do anything. And in fact, if you look at the AI Act, the first proposal, you'll see one article on unacceptable risk, Article 5. One article on transparency risk, low risk, is 52. All the rest is high risk, basically, except the code of conduct. And so, in a way, this having unacceptable risk and low risk was something that was added a bit later, because we also thought maybe it's not a bad idea to have different type of rules for other applications. But then a question came, what is an acceptable risk? Because then you prohibit something. What is low risk? And for unacceptable risk, essentially the idea was to say, to prohibit something that is so bad that basically should be already prohibited. So the idea was not to create a fundamental new prohibition, including the remote biometric identification, which is the most elaborate and complex prohibition, because data protection law already prohibited that. What the AI Act does, in fact, is simply, let's say, harmonizing, that's the term we use in the EU, the conditions for using AI for facial recognition in certain situations, which without the AI Act would be regulated by national law. So essentially, member states can do that, but they need to enact laws. Because well, in that case, it's Law Enforcement Directive or GDPR, already prohibits that. So the AI Act was trying to harmonize at EU level similar conditions. And it became a big discussion. And then for transparency, again, the idea was to sort of focus on just information. So that's a bit the labeling obligation. We knew about, this was something that many experts also had raised about the fact that when you interact with an AI, it's a matter of human dignity that you don't treat the AI as another human being. So because you should know you're interacting with a machine. That's a machine. It's not a human being. Even now, chatbots that people share
it's really
also
like human.
But they should know this is just a machine. Yeah. So, and that's one of the use cases. The second use cases indeed was the labeling for deepfake, and the third was emotion recognition, biometric categorization. Why? Because these are already regulated by GDPR. That's why we always said, oh, you just need to be informed that you are exposed to an emotion recognition system. And then you also need to, for instance, consent that the machine can take your data for processing for emotion recognition. But again, everything was biometric data was so sensitive that then it became even prohibited. So the final text of the AI Act has a prohibition for biometric categorization in certain cases and a prohibition for emotion recognition in certain cases, which I find honestly is a mistake.
Last week, more than 45 of European big tech companies, they called on the commission to stop the clock for at least 2 years. And their open letters are targeting the high-risk system. So how do you think about this?
Yes, they're targeting also general purpose AI. They asked for stop the clock for both general purpose AI, which of course didn't happen, and high risk. For high risk, mostly because of the lack of the standards, the technical standards. I personally support that. for the same reason that when we started the conversation, I said I'm not happy with certain choices, and now we are being affected by those choices in the implementation phase. This creates this situation of uncertainty, creates a sort of a block. This is what scares companies, because they see the law that is not clear. They see that the law has a lot of high sanctions, high fines, and they are afraid to therefore invest in AI, in developing AI, without exactly being assured that they will not be fined and they know how to comply. So in this uncertainty, I would have said better no law.
So you support the development of
AI? I support the stop the clock.
It's interesting. Last year I read an open letter on the official website of European Parliament, the question part, and the open letter said that Mazzini say that the number of AI patents on the EU lagged behind those of United States and China. The letter also says that you think that maybe the EU should innovate, not regulate. So the regulatory bar have been placed too high.
Too high.
So I'm curious about this because you are a legislator. You draft this law, but you support the development of AI. So how can we understand your position?
I'm not against regulating AI. I'm against bad regulation for AI.
Okay.
I'm against uncertain regulation for AI. I am against not thought through regulation for AI. So I think there are common sense things that can be done. But because, is what I said yesterday, when you're regulating a technology, yes, we regulate the use cases, right?
Yeah.
But it's a use case based on that technology. So the more you regulate that, the more you're creating barriers for that technology to enter the market. And in a moment when it's still unclear, let's say for traditional AI, let's say we had some good ideas, human oversight, transparency, the principles of the high-level expert group. And people were already thinking about the technical solutions, data sheets, model forms for documentation, how you ensure transparency, robustness, and so on. So I think we were at the moment where the legislation could push for more technical solutions. But if you do this for too many applications, the risk is that then you will not be able to actually get those technical solutions on time. And that's the problem. So my initial idea of the AI Act, even my own personal idea, which doesn't fully reflect the Commission proposal. Then a Commission proposal, it was not just my idea. Of course, it was other people getting involved, and the managers and the other departments. So as much as I was the pen holder and the person who wrote the first draft, in a big institution like that, I think in any government, it's not that I'm the only decision makers. And so in my initial draft, I would have liked to see only few use cases. I would have liked basically the Act to focus on the functioning, the machine. How should the governance work? Who are the authorities? What are the powers of the authorities? How do we develop the standards? How do we properly delimit the risk? How do we properly delimit other legislation? So kind of the really more technical issues that are the basis for a well-functioning legislation. And I would have liked to have a very narrow scope of application. Very few high-risk use cases. Because that would have given us the opportunity to advance faster on the standards and learn by doing. And then you say, okay, now I see actually, we start having issues with AI applications in the financial services industry. And then you could add use cases. So I would have liked a more gradual approach. But even the Commission proposal has a lot of use cases. And so that explains why now it's not just one sector that is impacted and they are afraid. So this letter that you mentioned is signed by 60 companies in the EU, I think. And they're all from all sectors. Because none of them knows how to apply it. So in this situation, I think that considering also the geopolitics, where you have the United States that is just pushing forward on the application, supporting their companies to actually enter even more the EU market. China is, we know it's a different setting, but also you're also quite cautious in regulating. So we risk really, as you put in one of your questions, so you become sort of a regulatory island. We create walls with our rules for our companies. And then it's true that, yes, DeepSeek, they want to sell in the EU, or ByteDance, they want to sell in the EU, they have to comply. But they will not sell in the EU unless they get a certain degree of maturity and also financial resources, which the EU companies, of course, because you have developed the product in your market. Same for, I'm not even talking about Google or Microsoft or this big tech.
Yeah.
But all other companies in the world can develop their products, can test their products, can also even start making money with their products outside the EU. And then they can enter the EU market already with the strength to also hire lawyers, hire policy people, talk to the regulators, and be able to handle the regulation. But in the EU, most SMEs don't have that capacity. So in that sense, this risks strangling AI adoption and innovation in Europe. And that's the thing I said, 1 year ago when I left the Commission, the 1st of August 2024. I had an interview with Bloomberg and very diplomatically, but that's what I said, that I think the bar has been set too high and we risk creating a moat for established companies.
So you support that the EU can stay flexible on the timeline of AI Act?
I think it would be a good idea.
Another thing is that during the process of drafting, a lot of lobbying happened, right, from the giants in the United States and Europe. So is there any certain provisions that be weakened because of this pressure?
Honestly, I receive these questions a lot around the lobbying, but I don't think that lobbying has worked a lot in the EU. And the results demonstrate it. Because the final AI Act is much more regulatory intense or heavy than the first proposal. So, strangely, I think the EU is not very permeable to lobbying by big tech. I'm sure it exists and it happened, but I don't see this is working. Quite the contrary, actually, the EU is much more permeable to lobbying by NGOs or by
social organizations.
Because these organizations seems to have a lot of the message to the public is very strong. And so I think the politicians feel that if they do something in favor of business, they're going to favor big tech, and which is bad for the reputation. But if they favor some opinion from the social organizations, then it's good for the public opinion. So more protection for fundamental rights, more protection for privacy, even when that may not be needed, because we already have, GDPR or fundamental rights legislation. Which the problem, in fact, in certain cases is more not that we don't have the rules and we need to add more, is that the rules may not be applied as they should. So personally, I don't think the lobbying has been really pushing for less regulation, but more for more regulation. And the whole example about generative AI and foundation model, it's actually is the result of lobbying by organizations that are advocating for existential risks of AI, like Future of Life Institute. So these are organizations that pushed you to even create this two set of rules for foundation models with systemic risk without even actually clarifying what these risks are. This doesn't come certainly from big data. Well, in part, I have to correct myself. In part, yes, because there is a strange combination between some of these theories around AI being a danger for humanity and the hype that these theories create under the actual technology, which is only supposedly developed by certain companies. So those companies benefit also from that public attention. And OpenAI actually at some moment was asking for more regulation, because then the companies can use that as a moat. Because if they say, well, I'm the only one who develops this groundbreaking technology, so please regulate me and I'm going to tell you how to do it. And all others will be out because you regulate that technology according to my wishes.
Yes. GDPR is being simplified this year.
I'm not sure. I know there is, it's not simplified. I think there's been some upgrade or update linked to the enforcement mechanism.
Because a lot of media say that the Brussels attitude shift because the
That is true.
changed.
That is true.
Yeah.
But it's
especially after the Paris AI Action Summit.
That is true. The Commission has announced an omnibus legislation at the end of the year for simplifying legislation for SMEs essentially. But I don't. So there is a discussion whether the AI Act will be part of that package, which means that indeed the Commission is to make a new proposal to amend the AI Act. But I'm not sure whether there is the GDPR in that package. I don't know. It could be. But to be honest, I don't expect major changes.
Let's talk about the new codes of practice. It's just like the compromise of the AI Act because the EU is facing so huge pressures and urgently needs support of the complaints, the big complaints. So do you agree with this statement? That's a compromise.
I haven't had the time to really review the details, so I cannot say. I can say, though, that, as I said at the beginning, for me, this matter was not mature for regulation. So anything that happens with the code of practice is somewhat impacted by this fundamental flaw of the process, which it's not the code of practice who should make certain choices. That choices should have been made by the legislator, which didn't do it because they didn't know how to handle it. So therefore, the code of practice is just a way to sort of try to now, okay, because we have the law, we have somehow to find some solutions. But then this creates a bit this complexity of, on the one hand, there is not in-house expertise how to handle it. So then it's outsourced to experts. But the experts also don't have the legitimacy. And what happened was that they involved a large group of stakeholders. So I think the people who were selected for drafting the code of practice or helping draft were like 800 people. So you cannot draft something with 800 people where you have one representative from Google, one representative from
Amazon,
university, 1%. So I think there is a need to understand that if these technologies are developed by certain companies, you have to talk to them first. And you as a regulator, you need to know what you're doing. So it's not that they just write their own rules, but you need to have inside the expertise, the understanding that you can filter the information from there, and then you make your own decisions. Instead, just putting all these companies together with all others, that's what I heard. I mean, people were unhappy because they felt, well, what does this person X know about foundation models, because they've never seen one. So one thing is consulting on a certain draft and a project, an idea that you have developed with expertise, with competence, and then it's fair to consult with everybody. But one thing is to involve everyone in the drafting. That's not the same thing. So regardless of the merits, I mean, I cannot speak to them because, as I said, I didn't read them, but the code of practice has become now a bit of a situation where if big tech doesn't sign up for the code of practice and Meta aside,
Meta refused.
That's a big political drawback for the EU, because they've done this for the developers of foundation models. And if they say, well, sorry, I don't agree with that, I don't sign up, they are still exposed to liability. But of course, politically, it's a problem for the Commission. So I think there may have been, I cannot, it's just my speculation, but there may have been the tendency to kind of try to, as much as possible, find a compromise so that they can get the approval, at least of certain companies, so that at least the exercise looks with some legitimacy and credibility. But indeed, it's the process that should have been not followed this way.
I want to ask the question about the AI Act, the sandbox. When I first saw this law, I noticed this part because a lot of people think that the EU always legislate targeting the big tech companies like the Amazon, Google. But I found that actually sometimes the small firms or startups, they have no resources to have their own compliance team. Even sometimes they release some new products without the privacy guidelines or something. So maybe the small firms always harm the individual rights as well. But the AI Act provides some opportunity or sandbox for these small firms. So how do you think that? Is there paradox here?
I think in part you're right in saying that I believe there is an excessive focus when you regulate to think about the big companies. And therefore not necessarily having really a proportional approach when it comes to smaller companies. And it is true, as you said, that even small companies can do damage. But of course, the extent of that damage will be different. So, and I think there is no zero risk society. In a way, if your goal is also to support competition, so having smaller companies enter the market and trying to compete with bigger companies, then of course you need to give a little bit leeway with the risk, yes, that they may put on the market a product that is risky or can create damage, but certainly would be less damaging than, let's say, from a bigger company. So in that sense, I personally would have liked to see exemptions, certain exemptions for smaller companies in the AI Act, even though the AI Act regulates the product per se. So if a product is high risk, you could say, well, you should say the product is high risk regardless of who is the provider. But indeed, this creates a situation where you are treating the same way two companies that are very different. So then you have to accept, okay, maybe if I really want to create competition, okay, I'll take a little bit of a risk here by allowing a company to be exempt from the rules, so have less rules. But then once they graduate because they become bigger, then they are subject to the. So this for me would have been a smarter approach, but it was something very. People were just not aligned because indeed there is a bit this absolutist view or ideological view. But if it is a risk, it's a risk. But the point is that there is no zero risk. So the sandbox, in part, was meant to mitigate this by allowing less resourced actors to develop products together with the authorities. But there are also their complications. First is the capacity of the authorities. So authorities are very busy with enforcement. So they don't have so much capacity to also closely collaborate with companies. And also, if AI adoption and knowledge is already limited even in certain companies, imagine the public administration. So it's a challenge to make sandboxes really be effective with limited capacity and knowledge. And the second aspect is the fact that the sandbox, ideally, to really be effective, should have had derogations in the sandbox. So basically, what is my advantage? What is my incentive as a company to go through the process of the sandbox, to talk to the authorities? This may take time because they are slow and so on. If I have to comply with the rules anyhow, it's basically free advice, free legal advice. But sometimes, companies just don't have the time. So the sandboxes, in my view, should have been more attractive by foreseeing derogations and also not only from the AI Act, but also from other legislation. For instance, GDPR, because you want to create an environment where indeed there should be more freedom in experimenting. But if you don't have that flexibility, the risk is that companies will not go there. Or if they go, it's going to take a lot of time. And so again, it's a matter of speed.
But we're facing a new world that more and more startups or small firms come out. Just like the DeepSeek. DeepSeek is not very big. I know a lot of academia love the concept of a computing governance. But DeepSeek maybe means that this is not that effective in the future.
Correct.
Yeah.
The compute governance was a theory premised upon the scaling laws, which was, of course, put forward by the big tech in the US, which they have a lot of data, a lot of compute, lots of money. They could just throw more and more and more, and then they could see that the models will become better. And China didn't have the same compute. Didn't have the same because of the export controls. So they just had to be more creative, more inventive. But they demonstrated exactly. That's actually the second interview I gave to Bloomberg. It was after DeepSeek. They demonstrated exactly that this idea of regulating AI based on compute is flawed. And this is not something that we didn't know. At least I knew, and I said that this didn't make a lot of sense. But it comes ultimately really from partly those who indeed, those individuals are very concerned about safety. And indeed, even, about this letter, people wanted to stop at some moment the development of certain powerful AI systems. And so they saw the compute as one proxy to limit, development of certain AI. And partly comes from the executive order by the Biden administration, which included certain provisions obliging model providers to disclose information based on compute. So these were the factors that led to ultimately incorporate this compute threshold also in the AI Act, but with much more consequential impact, because the Biden administration executive order was just an executive order, and now it's been rescinded. So doesn't exist any longer. But in the AI Act, it has remained a law, and it's there. But it remains, in my view, a flawed tool to estimate the riskiness of the model, I think. And as we go forward, it will be clear that companies will try to develop more efficient models because it's just cheaper.
Yeah. Because the Act and the Code of Practice also set standards for open source models. DeepSeek is also open source models. How do you think about that? Maybe the more and more countries will think open source can be treated as a strategy to get the digital sovereignty.
Exactly. This is, for instance, what comes out from the latest document from the Trump administration. There is actually quite a focus. I haven't read it, but just quickly reports, there's a focus on open source. And this indeed for Europe, also open source should be the way to go.
Is Mistral is open source?
Mistral is open source. Because also because of the variety of languages. So definitely open source is the way to go. And I would have strongly advocated for indeed avoiding including open source. First of all, indeed, I didn't want to regulate models in the first place. If you don't regulate the models in the first place, you don't have the question of open source. If you regulate only the system, so the application, usually it's always commercial. But indeed, the problem of the impact of the AI regulation on open source and therefore also on the potential negative impact on the innovation that can be created on open source came to fruition because of the shift of the regulation to the foundation models. So, and the AI Act is true, contains some exceptions for open source, but they are not. They are just on certain transparency obligations. So I'm a bit afraid that because the open source could also be captured by the regulation, not to be the systemic risk, and there is so much uncertainty that this also could create fears around doing open source, and therefore, we lose the opportunities of open source. I think it's
That's a very huge community
for everybody. I think because I'm not an engineer, but my understanding is really open source does not have drawbacks except if you believe in, of course, the fact that they can be misused and they could lead to, really dangerous. I still fail to see the evidence of that.
Because some companies say that their models are open source, but actually not. Yeah, it's a fake open source.
It's a fake open source. And I think open source can mean different things. So, especially for AI, it's not like the classic software open source. I think there you just go to the code, right? And you change. But for AI, it's about the data, it's about the training algorithm, it's about the weights. So it's a bit of a much more complex issue. And even this complexity is not really fully understood by policymakers.
So that's a big challenge of the AI Act is facing. The definition of technology and what's a boundary of the technology.
Yeah, I think we would have been much better off just taking this completely off the table. This whole model regulation. Because this would have taken us really away also from the open source, away from the foundation model, away from this flop issue. And then, of course, it's not that the regulators go on vacation. So you do the AI Act, you finalize it, you focus on the actual standards. So you make sure that, because all the energy that have gone into drafting, the code of practice, guidelines, this should have been put somewhere else. And then if we realize, because it's a common issue, like the safety of powerful models, it's a common issue. That's what I hear even here. In China, when I had meetings with people ask about that. Same in the US, same in Japan. There was a professor here with us from Japan. So that's why there was the G7. I mean, I know China is not part of that, but at some moment there was this Hiroshima process focused on advanced systems, on advanced models. And that was a much better forum to discuss these questions internationally and to come to some alignment. And to my mind, this should have been included, really everybody, including China, because China is an actor in that space. So it was not smart to just regulate it with a domestic legislation like the Act has done just for Europe. Thinking that, because we have the legislation in Europe, then we're going to regulate the models coming from China, the models coming from the US.
Well, the United States just issues the AI action plan, right?
Yes.
2 days ago or
Yes.
3 days. Have you ever concerned that they actually rolling back some AI rules, I think. So have you ever concerned that Europe might become the isolated island in terms of the regulation? Have you ever concerned
Yes.
that?
Yes.
I think that's a big concern.
Yes. Not in the sense of the isolated island for the regulation. Isolated for the technology.
Okay.
That just worries me. If the regulation no one cares, in a way, what worries is the impact of the regulation. Because Brussels and the EU, after GDPR, I think in the mindset of the EU, there has been this idea that, if we move first and we do a law before others will follow because our market is where people want to come. That's the logic. And this, it's not a stupid logic. Is if you want one way to do foreign policy.
Yeah.
The Americans do it with Google, the companies, and China may have other tools. Everyone uses its tools, and maybe Europe thought, we could do that. But the problem is that if you do a law that is really good, because I think in Europe also we have a strong tradition for legal expertise. When I went to Taiwan, I remember last year, I was interviewed by a journalist and she said, in Europe you have two good things, research and law.
Yeah.
The law are a tool. And the tool should be well crafted depending on your objectives. So you need to know where you want to go.
Yeah.
You need to know what the consequences will be. If you just do the law for the sake of being the first, for the sake of saying, we are better than others, our values are better than yours, this is just not the right approach. So I find that sometimes there is this, I would call it almost arrogance about, we are exporting our values. But who are we? To the point that actually in Europe, now we have this very strict regulation about real-time facial recognition or biometric system, but also ex post. So now the AI Act contains essentially a prohibition for ex post use of AI in certain situations. So the police cannot use it. So which means in practice, the police have to watch it manually. Does it make any sense? And ultimately, the issue that I have with the facial recognition is not the problem of AI. It's the problem of data collection and the data use. Because you can theoretically use when it's needed, but then erase the information. That personally, I have no problem. So if my face is scanned, the system is technically sound, meaning I'm not mismatched those. My face is scanned, and then of course there is no match, and my image is completely discarded. So there is rules around, how you collect, how you delete the data. But then if you have a proper match, why should we not use this opportunity? So I think a lot of the debate in the EU around facial recognition has been based on ideology, as opposed to what are actually concrete tools that we can implement in this invasive technology to make sure that we find that balance, then yes, if the technology is abused in certain countries, I mean, I know in Europe, personally, I don't think we run this risk. Maybe in certain countries in Eastern Europe, I don't know, but that's what sometimes people say. But given our traditions, our cultures, I don't see that risk. So I don't see why we should not, with the proper safeguards, allow the use of these tools for the police to make it more efficient, to make it everyone safe. There has been this discussion as if the only fundamental rights that matter in the EU are those of the criminals. What about the fundamental rights of the people in the street?
No offense, I was being robbed in Rome many years ago. No, actually, it's not robbed. They came into my room where I'm asleep.
Oh, really?
And they took everything of mine.
That's horrible.
My cash, my computer, my phone, even my glasses. I don't know why.
Yeah, that's bad. So I often advocate now for really evidence-based regulation, knowledge-based regulation. In my TED talk, that's the core message I wanted to give. Because of this, because I had an intuition when I was working on the Act, things were not always so clear-cut. There was a lot of nuances that I myself felt I don't have enough information on this. But I was pushed to advance. And then now these are the results. So I would not want people to replicate this for something that is so important, AI, both for the benefits and the risks. And that is also so complex that very few people really have this combination of policy, sensitivity, legal expertise, technical understanding. So you don't want to rush. And maybe there is one issue that is particularly relevant, let's say the copyright issue, I don't know. Then focus on that. But don't overdo with overarching, broad, without fully having the understanding that is needed. Because the regulation is going to be impactful.